So yeah, I know this is a section about pigs, so why am I going to talk about Ambari? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, we're going to use Ambari to actually execute our pig scripts here in this section, so we may as well talk about it now. And Ambari itself doesn't really fit neatly into any existing section in this course, to be honest. It's kind of the Swiss Army knife of your Hadoop cluster, so it does a lot of different things. Let's just do a little overview of what Ambari is all about. So I've already kicked off my virtual machine here for my Hadoop Hortonworks sandbox session. And I've gone to my browser and pulled up 127.0.0.1:8080 to go into the Ambari dashboard here. So let's take a look at what's actually going on here. We've peeked at this before and kind of glossed over it. So this dashboard tab here is giving you sort of an overview of what your cluster is doing and its overall health. And it shows you things like, here's my disk usage on my HDFS cluster. So what's actually being used there? I've got 48% of it in use. And it's showing green because, you know, that's okay, nothing to get worried about. You can actually click on these little things to configure the percentages at which it starts to go orange or red. So it's right now it's set up to show orange if I hit 85% and red over 95% capacity. And if I want to change those thresholds, I can. You can also move these widgets around if you want to, or even remove them entirely. And that lets you sort of customize your own little view of your dashboard for your cluster. Now, a lot of these widgets don't really do anything just because we're only running a single node here on a sandbox environment. But if you were on a real cluster, most of these things would be lit up and giving you real information about things like overall CPU usage and cluster load and whatnot. But since we don't actually have a real cluster, those are irrelevant at the moment. So that's one thing Ambari can do for you, give you a nice little dashboard of your cluster and give you a quick glance as to whether things are healthy or not. You can just take a quick look for things that are orange or red and say, oh, let's go look at that. Something might be up. Now, I should back up a little bit. Ambari is also primarily used for just installing Hadoop. And since we actually installed Hadoop from an image on a virtual machine, we didn't have to do that. But a lot of times people set up a Hadoop cluster just by setting up Ambari to start with. And Ambari can be used to install all of these different services over here across your entire cluster. So one thing you can do is just start up with a blank empty cluster, install Ambari on your master node, and use that to actually set up the rest with the specific services you want. So if an out-of-the-box distribution like Hortonworks or Cloudera or MapR doesn't cut it for you, you can always do it the hard way using Ambari to make it, well, not so hard. And over here we have a list of all the different services. And if I click on one of these, like let's say, I don't know, MapReduce 2, that will take me automatically to the Services tab where I will go to the same place as the Services tab over here. And you can see things like, you can click on the history server here to get a little bit more of a view into the actual host there that's running the history server for MapReduce. So a lot of these things are kind of tied together, right? Let's go back to Services Yarn. Let's look at Yarn here, and this also has its own little metrics dashboard here. Again, since I'm not actually running a real cluster, there's nothing to look at, but it also has things like config plugins. So some services expose a configuration panel to Ambari. So if you go to the service view and it has support for Ambari, you can do things like interactively change the amount of memory that's allocated for nodes or containers, or change how CPU scheduling works and things like that. So instead of futzing around with config files, you can actually do this in a graphical, interactive manner. Now, obviously, you don't want to actually mess with these things unless you really know what you're doing and you're a Hadoop administrator, but this is where it all lives. So, I can mess around with these settings and, well, I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to undo it and put it back to what it was there. But you can see it's very easy to mess around and restore defaults if you need to. Again, don't mess with this unless you know what you're doing. So that's basically the Services tab. It gives you a quick overview of the different services running on your cluster and often ways of configuring them. So, let's take a look at Pig, because that's what this section is going to be about. I can open up the Configs tab on the Pig service and go to Advanced Pig Properties. And this allows me to actually edit the config file right here from a web browser. So if I wanted to, for example, change the log level from info to something more strict like error, I could just do that here by commenting out that line and changing info to error. So that's pretty handy stuff, right? Okay. Next tab over here is hosts, and we got a quick peek of this before. So this will give me a view of every host running on my cluster. For me, I only have this one virtual machine running, so all I see is this one host, but that lets you drill into each individual host on your cluster and see what services are actually running on each host. And you can even start and stop or restart services as need be. So if you're running a big cluster and you know that a service is hung, on one specific host, this is a very easy way to go in there and actually restart that service on the host that's having trouble. So cool stuff. There's also a view into configuration specific to that host and alerts. Let's talk about alerts. It's a relatively new addition to Ambari. It lets you set up automatic alerts that will actually email you when something goes wrong. So instead of having to go back to the dashboard periodically to see how things are running, Ambari can actually tell you proactively when things are about to go bad. So for example, we could click into HDFS storage capacity, and you can see we can actually set up an alert to let us know if growth rate is disturbingly large. And if we just enable that, you could do so by clicking on the disable checkbox there and changing that to enable. And the other thing you can do is configure where that notification goes. So if I go back to the alert overview here, we can go up to actions and say manage notifications. And from here, you can add new notifications of people that should be alerted when something goes wrong. So I could type in a name like HDFS is Fubard, and you could type in, description and email it to whoever you want to. So something that often happens is you'll send that to some special email address or, set up some subject or description that will trigger your phone to actually, make some alert sound or go nuts, right? So you can actually get notified of that. Or you might even, if you're still using pagers, send that to a gateway that actually pages you. So that way you can have Ambari just sitting there and waiting for something to go wrong. And if you look into the details of how these alerts work, it can be set up to be very robust. You can tell it to only wake you up if things go wrong for a certain number of times in a row, if things are like trending in the wrong direction. So you can set things up to really minimize the false positives there. There's also an admin tab here that we can use. And from here, you can just see what's installed, what versions they are, and also what accounts are associated with each service. So pretty cool stuff. And Kerberos is a security feature that we'll probably talk about later. Now, one thing I want to mention too is that I'm logged in as admin here instead of Maria_dev. And in order to log in as admin, well, first of all, you have to if you want to be able to actually administer your cluster from Ambari. So let's talk about how to do that. MariaDev does not have the privileges you need for that. So if you do want to use Ambari in this fashion, what you need to do is actually open up a session to your cluster, like I've done already here. So I've just used PuTTY to connect into my sandbox as Maria_dev. And in order to enable admin access to Ambari, you need to set up an admin user. So to do that, you would first super user as root, using whatever password you set up previously. And from here, you can just run the script ambari-admin-password-reset. And that will just prompt you to enter in your password for the admin user for Ambari. And if after that point, it will actually shut down Ambari and restart it. And once that's done, you can then log in to Ambari as admin instead of Maria_dev, which will give you more privileges and the ability to actually start and stop hosts and services and whatnot. Okay, so we'll just let that chug away. But the thing we're going to use most in this class is this little grid here. And this is a cool thing that kind of extends Ambari to do whatever services want them to do. So we've already looked at the files view. All right, we're back up. So as we did before, this is one view into the HDFS file system, and this is a very handy way of just manipulating files in HDFS, renaming things, adding new folders, whatever you need to do. And there's also views for other stuff too. We took a quick look at the Hive view back in lecture 1 when we started messing with Hive really quickly, and we'll revisit that shortly too. But in the context of this section, what we're going to be interested in is the pig view. And this is a way for us to actually run pig scripts, and we'll see what that means in our next lecture. Very easy, and we can also save the scripts that we've written and rerun them. So you can see here a little preview of things to come. Up next in this section, we're going to use pig to find the oldest highly rated movie in our dataset and the most popular bad movie in our dataset. So this should be some fun stuff. So that's Ambari in a nutshell. I just want to give you sort of an overview of all the different things it can do. It's kind of the Swiss Army knife of your cluster, like I said. It pretty much sits on top of all of your services and lets you maintain them and administer them and also interact with them through the views that it exposes. So that's Ambari. Let's use Ambari to actually mess with pig, but first we need to learn what pig's all about. So up next, let's actually talk about pig and what it's for.